Hello, welcome to the After Sermon Podcast. If you're listening and not seeing, you're obviously hearing my voice instead of Tammy's voice. Tammy is gone today. We are missing her.
Yes.
Right now.
Our rose between two thorns.
That is good. I like that.
Yeah.
I think she would like that too.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're missing Tammy, but this week, as we kick off our May podcast, we're kicking off a new series that we're doing on the topic of forgiveness. And I got to tell you, I remember when you first sent me the outline for this series, man, I was so excited. I just think this is such a significant topic that is so hard to talk about, so hard to figure out in the lives of so many people. And yet we know those scriptures that we think about forgiveness, that know it is fundamental to the Christian life and our relationship with God. And yet it's such a hard topic to even begin to talk about.
Yeah, man. And this series kind of came out of nowhere for me. And it came out of a day of spiritual retreat. So after spending some time with the Lord, I said, what are the things, Lord, that are not what they should be in my life? What are some things that I still need to work on? And forgiveness is what came to the surface. And it became that idea grew. As I worked through some issues of forgiveness in my own life, that idea grew to, hey, this is not just for you. This is for the church as a whole. Yeah. And I sat down and wrote out 4 weeks of the series, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. And it just came really easily. Wow. And I said, okay, there's something here. And then, this tells you, so normally our usual duty cycle is like, I'll speak for 3 weeks, sometimes about 3 weeks. And then, I'll take a week off and at least a week off. And in this series, what I really sensed from the Lord was him saying, you need to teach this. This is your series to teach. Yeah. So, I'm by the time the series is over, I will have taught 6 weeks, which is in a row, which is usually longer than we go. Yeah. But the reason behind it was this, it has nothing to do with and you guys are totally capable of preaching on forgiveness. This is like really personal. This series is really personal because of what, God is doing in me. And so I just, sense from the Lord that he was saying, I want you to do this. So that's where it came from. And so we're going to walk through for the different weeks. We're going to talk this week about the nature of forgiveness. What is it and why is it needed? And then we're going to talk about forgiving other people, receiving forgiveness from other people. And then finally, how do we deal with forgiveness with the Lord? And how do we receive his forgiveness for us? So those are kind of the weeks of the series. So this week is the setup to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love how you're breaking that down. I think often, at least as I've thought about this or have my own memories from church life, forgiveness is usually like this one-hit sermon. Let's just talk about forgiveness. Yeah. And we almost dismiss the complicated nature of this entire topic, which is why I think so many of us, I think we were saying this at the beginning, I think of the video Josh is making for us, but forgiveness is that thing that all of us want to receive, but so few of us know how to give it.
Right.
What a complicated thing to even enter into.
Or even that we expect.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, why couldn't you just forgive me? But and this is exactly what God was doing in me. There was kind of 2 classifications in my life. I was looking at some things, some wounds that had happened, some things that had already been forgiven, like atoned for. Yeah. But I was still carrying this grudge about it. So when I thought of the person, instead of it being a clear relationship between us, I was still thinking about the offense. I'm like, wait a second, that's not forgiveness. Yeah. They may have asked forgiveness. I may have extended forgiveness, but there's still something there. Yeah. That's one piece. The other piece, of course, is the stuff that has not been atoned for or asked for, and what do we do with that? So we'll talk about all of that in this series.
Yeah. Do you want to share any more about kind of what led you to this point in the message, like more of that story? I know you just mentioned there was kind of more for that in your heart.
Yeah. I think when you live long enough, you have endured and begun to carry all different offenses. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where God has met me in a place of, hey, this is as far as you're going to grow if you don't get some other things taken care of. And, a lot of us are stuck spiritually, and we're stuck because we can't grow past a certain thing, a certain belief, a certain
there you go.
hurt, a certain whatever it is. And I'm finding myself at this point where I'm like, wait a second, I feel like I've plateaued spiritually speaking over the last few months. And I'm like, well, God, what is going on where I want everything up and to the right always.
Yeah.
Why isn't that happening in me? Why do I feel like I'm just kind of at this plateau? It's the same sort of relationship that I had several months ago with the Lord, and I don't want that. I want it to grow. And I think a lot of it has to do with this idea of forgiveness, that there are things that need to be laid down. There are things that need to be truly turned over to Him. And, I shared about this a few weeks ago in a series, this thing that happened in our church that this is the only time I can ever say, I really feel like we did everything well. Like if I had to go back, I don't know that I'd change anything. We did it really, really well, but it still went south. And I still was like, oh man, but I haven't fully let go of the hurt that came from that. And I'm still working through some of that. And so that's even part of the forgiveness thing. We can't look at forgiveness like an event.
Yeah.
Like, I forgive you, now everything is fine. It's, I forgive you, and that's the beginning of the process.
Well, I think you articulated something important. I mean, most of us grew up as kids being told, all right, say you're sorry.
Right.
Now say I forgive you.
Yeah.
Now we're done.
Right.
And we are trained in our relationships that everything is once we've made the right statements that should resolve everything. And it creates, it can create dishonesty, which I think it does. But I think the bigger problem is it creates self-deception. Is inside, I have said I forgive you.
Yeah.
So I must have forgiven you.
Right.
But now there's this stuff going on inside of me.
Yeah.
But I forgave. What is going on?
I'm a bad person.
Yeah. Did something else happen or why is this yuck in me? And the thing is, though, because forgiveness is so tied to our relationship with God, I think we avoid going to that place of saying, I wonder if it's because of forgiveness or lack of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because there's so much yuck associated with that and the biblical narratives that we just want it to be something else. And your story, I think, is one that all of us honestly have in our own lives. This thing happened. I thought I did it. But I'm realizing there's still stuff there. Am I going to be willing to confront it?
Yeah.
And talk about it and consider the real deep things going on inside of me, or am I going to try to skip past it?
Man. Yeah. And we're going to talk about the process of forgiveness and what happens after that moment of, hey, I was wrong. I wronged you. I am sorry. I forgive you. Then what?
Yeah, then what?
And how awkward that is. Yeah. And so we'll talk about that in coming weeks of the series as well.
So right now, this week one.
Let's go back to why. Why is this even necessary? Where did the idea of broken relationship come from? Because it in our world is just part of our world. You have. If you grew up with siblings, you're going to steal each other's toys and hit each other in the back of the car and whatever, and you're going to have to apologize. Yeah. So this is very much part of our world. But why is it a part of our world? So this week, what we're going to do is go back to the very beginning. And Genesis 1 and 2 and Genesis 3. So what happens in Genesis is that God creates... The story is that God creates this world and He creates human beings and there's this perfect relationship. And specifically, there are three main relationships. The first one is with God Himself. Yeah. So human beings have this relationship with God Himself. But there's another relationship that God creates that's between humans and each other. Yeah. So between Adam and Eve, remember God creates Adam and he's working the garden, all is well. And God says, it's not a suitable partner for this one. And of all the animals, all the things I've created, there's not one that goes together with this one.
Yeah.
I need to create another one of this one. And that's the language from the Hebrew, and he does. And so so there's a relationship between us and each other. And then there's this relationship between us and God's creation. Nature is how we think of it.
Yeah.
And then, as we'll see, and many of us know, the choice is made.
Yeah.
And in Genesis, this is described as the eating of this fruit that was forbidden to be eaten. But it's really that idea. There's nothing naughty about fruit. Fruit is delicious.
Yeah.
The problem is it's the symbol of a choice to rebel against God, to not do what God has specifically said, or to do what God has specifically said not to do. And so what happens as a result of that is there's this break. And the break in the relationship happens in all three of those relationships. And so the consequences, so if we go to Genesis chapter 3.
Yeah, go ahead.
After they've eaten, one of the key points, verse 7, the eyes of both of them were open and they knew they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So they didn't, here are two, we don't know how old they're supposed to be here, but they're presented not as children, but as adults. And they don't recognize that nudity is a thing. So let's stop for just a second, because this is an important part of the creation story and the creation narrative. When your kids are little, if you have kids and you got to bathe them. We had a son and a daughter. They were a couple years apart from each other. When they were little, we would bathe them together. There was never. It was not weird. It was not strange. It just was hey, we're multitasking. We got to get this done. But there reaches a point when you don't do that anymore. Okay, where to do that would not be okay. And that point is different for, different ages and different whatever. But that's the idea. And so the way this story is presented to us, Adam and Eve are created not recognizing or understanding or having the comprehension that nudity in front of each other is unusual or something that they should sexualize. So they're essentially created with the mindset of total innocence and childlikeness, the way children are created. The little, toddlers, when they get in the tub, there's no sexual connotation to it. There shouldn't be. That has not been introduced into their world yet. And so it's the same thing. Sex has not been introduced into their world. And so this is a loss. This is presented as a loss of innocence. The rebellion is not just a rebellion against God. It violates something where they're introduced to a concept, this idea of nudity, sexuality, whatever it is, that God did not intend for them to be introduced to yet. It was too early.
So as when I look at this, one of the things that jumps out to me is the eyes were opened. They knew they were naked. I see what you're saying right there. But the additional piece that I see in that too is at this point, there was not, when relationships become broken, we now enter a place of vulnerability and nakedness exposes vulnerability. Naked, and like we talk, like there's this element of like, I'm fully exposed. You see now me for who I fully am. Like nothing's hidden from you. And I see this also picture of, whereas there was total security in the relationships, there was total trust.
Right.
Now that by sin entering, by that rebellion in broken relationships, now we have broken trust. And now there's this vulnerability that does not feel safe in the same way it once was. And I mean, this is the nature of what all relational damage really comes out of is I'm not sure I can feel with you what I once felt before.
Yes. Yes. And so now what do I have to do?
Yeah.
I have to hide.
Yes.
I have to cover myself.
Right.
They sew fig leaves together to cover themselves from each other. When God comes, they hide.
Yeah.
They don't hide from each other. They cover with each other. And then they hide from God. So it's a two-step.
Yeah, that's
thing.
good.
So they are clearly, their eyes are open and they clearly go, oh, wait a second. I should not be in this state that I am in. I need to conceal myself from you. And so what God says, so verse 8, the man and his wife heard the sound of Yahweh God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, and they hid from Yahweh God among the trees of the garden. So Yahweh called out to the man and said to him, where are you? And he said, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked. So I hid. And then God asks him, who told you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? So here's a break. The break begins with God. Now I need to hide from God. I can't have this relationship with God. But then here comes the break with each other. The man replied, the woman you gave to be with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate. So Adam, instead of standing up for his wife, instead of stepping in front of her and saying, I've sinned, throws her under the bus.
He reinforces her now vulnerability state of, I'm not sure I can trust and be vulnerable in front of you.
Yeah. And I don't want to take responsibility for this. You did this.
Yeah.
And so the Lord turns to the woman and said, what have you done? And the woman says, well, it's not me. It's the serpent.
That's right.
So they're going down the line. The Lord. So then the Lord, so that's the break in nature.
Yeah.
With God's created order. So God pronounces a judgment, and part of the judgment is on the male-female relationship and on human beings. Part of the judgment is a break in a relationship with God. And then part of the judgment is a break in nature. Suddenly the earth is not going to work with human beings anymore to produce food and to do good things. It's going to go into hiding from us, and we're going to go into hiding from it. And that's part of the curse.
Well, there's this hidden symbiotic relationship that we want to pretend doesn't exist. I think often when it comes to hurt wounds, me and God are okay, even though me and you are not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We want to create separated narratives when it comes to hurts and wounds and broken relationships, as if they can each be independent, nature, humanity, and us and God. And he's saying, no, the instant it occurred, it affected all at the same time. They all are impacted.
Yeah.
They're all broken now. We're maybe handling it a little different way, as you articulated well, but they're all broken. You cannot say one is messed up and the other are okay.
Yeah.
And this is the picture we see right here laying out in their interaction with God and each other.
Yeah.
But we don't want that.
Yeah.
And just as I'm processing that, what do you think brings us to that place of wanting to avoid this symbiotic consequence, as it were, that's being presented here?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot here. There's certainly fear.
Yeah.
There's the fear that I'm going to have to endure a consequence. There's pride involved in this that, I don't want to admit that I failed. So there are all those are pieces at play.
It reminds me of a statement we hear people make sometimes, which is, I really love God, I just don't love his church. Why do people not love the church? Well, it's wounds.
Yeah.
It's broken relationships. And we'll easily say to them, well, you can't say you love God and not love his bride. And I think that's kind of what's being played out here is we cannot separate broken relationships into categories. If I'm broken with Steve, I'm broken with God.
Yeah.
And I have to deal with both. And you're going to walk us through that in this threes. But even though it's three separate messages, they're all intertwined. They're not separate pieces that can be independent.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such an interesting thing. There's so much church hurt out there, and I know there is.
Yeah.
However, there is also a whole group of people, and we run across them often, who are supposedly hurt by the church, but as you dig into the story, it is actually It was the church holding you accountable the way we're supposed to biblically.
Yeah.
And saying, no, this behavior is reprehensible in the eyes of the Lord. And you've come into the community here and you've asked us for accountability. We gave you that accountability. And now you're, no, I don't want accountability. And you ran away from that church, that place that was trying to restore you and put you in a better place. And now you say, I'm hurt. The church hurt me. Because they called me to the very accountability that I submitted myself to. So that is its own kind of deception and kind of dark. So there's a break there.
Well, it's what they did here. It wasn't me, it was her.
Right.
It wasn't me, it was the snake. This is exactly what you're describing.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Did you not eat the fruit? Or did you eat the fruit? Did you not eat? I ate the fruit. Then you are responsible.
Yeah.
That's part of the, it's the old adage that the guy who holds the ladder for the thief who climbs the ladder to break into the house is just as culpable as the guy who's as the guy who crawls in. They're both equally culpable. And so that's what you have here. Yes, Eve has the interaction with the serpent, but Adam, who has gotten all of the instructions from the Lord, either has not passed those instructions on well to Eve, apparently, but even if he has, he still takes this step that he didn't have to take of eating that fruit. He could have allowed her to eat it and not eaten it himself. But he didn't.
Well, then as we see him go through each of the curses that you're kind of going to unpack in these through relationships, it reminds us a couple weeks ago when we talked about having to entrust to God to deal with the real problem. And God is saying, I'm going to deal with I see what Adam did. I see what humanity did. I see what man did. I see what woman did. I see what's happening. I'm going to deal with that. But you have to deal with you.
Yeah.
You've got to talk about what's going on with you. You know, as we are looking at the series, I think often this passing the buck thing, we're reading a book right now as elders, fantastic book. And it got me thinking, one of the things he talked about was the nature of broken relationships. And he goes, and he says, of the nature of living in a world of sinful nature is that we will continually wound and hurt each other. And we sin because of the wounds. Hurt people, you know, as that slogan goes. And he's not wrong in that. But I instantly went back to this story and I thought to myself, yeah, but Adam and Eve didn't get hurt by anybody. God never wounded them. And they still sinned. They still did what they wanted. And it is true. Hurt people. But that to me is a phrase of how I can understand why I was wounded, not justify my anger, but that's a different conversation. But in that, I think we have to be honest. What was going on in Adam and Eve that brought them to this point of sin is going on in us, regardless of whatever wounds we have experienced. And wounds trigger. Like they multiply things going on inside of us. But when we really want to deal with maybe the root causes of our brokenness or our pain or struggle to forgive, is when my eyes are on the person that wounded me, I'm going to do exactly what they're doing. Instead, I got to go back and say, I've got a brokenness in me that exists completely independent of what anybody else has done to me. And until I'm willing to start at that place and still I'm willing to stop saying, but she gave me the apple, but the serpent, and start with me, I can never get to a place of understanding forgiveness or healing.
We have these, you see symbiotic relationship is how you said it. We do have this like expectation that, I will if you will.
Conditional.
I guess I'm willing to engage in that if you will acknowledge the following things. And what we're going to learn about forgiveness is that that's not real forgiveness. It's not actually what it is. It is not based on whether or not you do that. Forgiveness is something that starts within us. Jesus' teaching on forgiveness was radical. And we'll talk about over the next.
It's so hard to not like go into to the next week.
Well, it's all tied together. I mean, that's
exactly what we're saying
because it's a topic, and it's unlike when you do a topical series, it's unlike anything else because you're not in a book where you can see the one author's train of thought, weaving through. We're coming out of doing that with James, but we're going into a series where we're pulling from different places in the Bible for a reason, because we want a wholly biblical look, WHOLLY, wholly biblical look at what forgiveness is. And this is where it starts. So the break in the relationship between us and God is really the beginning of the break in the relationship between us and each other as well.
Yes.
So Jesus is the answer.
Yes.
He's going to repair, but not fully, not yet.
Yes.
And that's the last week. So there you go.
Like I said, I am very, really excited. I'm anticipating this series because, again, come back to your story. I know there's that in my own life. I know that story exists because that story exists in all of us. I think if there's any way people, any of us can come into this series is to recognize I need this series. There is not a single person that is going to listen online or in the services or whatever it is that doesn't need to recognize this is my story too.
Yeah.
I'm at this place. But isn't that the beauty of God's grace? Like God at this moment when everything was broken, he could have just been like, well, this is done. Nothing required God at that moment to come back where he comes at the end and where he's like, but I'm going to restore this. I'm going to fix this. When you wrong me, Steve, I have to remind myself, but I've wronged Steve at some point, right? Like there's this mutual brokenness that almost is like, well, I've done it to Steve. Steve's done it to me, of course I might as well I have to forgive him because he's forgiven me. But with God never did anything. Oh. And yet he initiates grace and mercy, bringing us to this place of forgiveness that, none of us can relate to God's position in this.
Exactly.
None of us can. And yet that is the way God's saying, respond.
Yeah.
Like I am showing you how to respond, which is what we're about to go to in the series.
Well, I am out of voice.
I can hear. Well, all right.
I think we have to bring it in for a landing.
Okay. All right. Well, since you're out of voice, I'll land us right now. That's okay. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited for the rest of the series. Looking forward to walking this together. Have a great week.